topic of discussion that has been, first of all, I would like to thank Vikas and Rajesh for giving me this opportunity. And the topic that was given to me was low backache and PIVD. And this is an interesting topic, very vast topic, but I don't want to get into everything. I will share with you the objectives of this session that I have in my mind that I want to share. So there are three objectives that I have taken. First one is to lay out a perspective into the complex problem of low backache that helps the practitioner to arrive at a correct diagnosis using right tools of clinical acumen along with diagnostic modalities. I will explain this. Second important point is I want to clarify that low backache is not equal to PIVD. We generally have this idea कि किसी को भी पीठ में दर्द हुआ तो MRI करा लेते हैं, उसको डिस्क कहाँ पे है देख लेते हैं. It's not that. It is a far complicated thing, and I'll explain why. And that is why the last point, to understand how limited the MRI is. MRI as such is a very limited tool. It's basically your clinical examination, physical examination that will help you arrive at the diagnosis and right patient selection. So these are the three objectives. One is to help you understand the complexity of the problem, so you always arrive at the diagnosis through a right step-by-step manner. Second is to clarify that low backache is not always equal to PIVD. And then lastly, we have to understand that MRI has its own limitations. So the lifetime, why have we chosen this topic? Well, lifetime incidence of low backache is going to be 61%. So at any time out of 10 people, more than 6 people will be having low backache. What will be its prevalence? Well, it will be around 31% in a given population aged between 40 and 47. In women, this lifetime incidence is going to be even higher, 66%. And prevalence will be 35%. So we are bound to encounter these patients on a daily basis. Everybody is going to meet a low backache patient on a daily basis. So we really need to understand what we are dealing with. So what am I going to talk about in this session? Am I going to talk about aggrecan genes, metalloproteinase 3, collagen type 9, alpha 1, alpha 2 gene expression, or histological structure of nucleus pulposus and annulus? No, I'm not going to talk about all these theoretical intricacies. I want the practitioner, that is you, to come up with a solid, workable understanding of what this disease is. So I'm going to skip all these unnecessary technicalities. This is something that I want you to remember as soon as you encounter your first patient, that here is the dorsal root ganglion. It has given up three roots. One is the ventral ramus, the other is the dorsal ramus, and then there is this thin, very thin, I hope you can see on the screen, this thin sinovertebral nerve. Can I get some feedback? Is everybody able to see my screen? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is the dorsal root ganglion. It has given off three main branches. One is the ventral branch, which is going to supply all the ventral structures. This is the dorsal ramus, which has further divided itself into three, and then there is the sinovertebral nerve, which is a thin filamentous branch. Now this is supplying the annulus fibrosus of the disc. It is also going to go ahead and supply the facet joints, and this ventral ramus is going to supply all structures ventral to the dorsal root ganglion. The dorsal ramus is going to divide itself into three: the lateral, intermediate, and medial. The lateral and intermediate are going to pierce the entire structures, right from the interspinous ligament on to the muscles and the skin. And the medial branch will again divide into three branches, and it will supply the facets. So now you can understand that at a single level, there is this sinovertebral nerve, which could be the cause, which could give pain, referred to the disc bulge itself from the annulus fibrosus, not exactly indenting the thecal sac. Then there is this dorsal ramus, which is through its lateral and intermediate branches supplying the facet joints, so you can have facet joint pain. Then the lateral intermediate branches are going through the entire, right from interspinous ligament up to the skin. So if anything goes wrong, right from interspinalis ligament to all the musculature to the skin, there can be production of, there can be nociception. That means a sensation of pain. And of course, there is this exiting nerve root, which can be compressed by the nerve, the common PIVD thing that can happen. But one needs to understand that even from a neurological standpoint alone, there are so many pain producing structures and pain conveying nerves. So if we fail to isolate where the pain is coming from, we will always end up with a dissatisfied and untreated patient. This is another interesting entity that we need to know before we go into PIVD. Axial lumbar pain. Now, if you read the literature, what is said about axial lumbar pain is that this would be experienced by most of the people at some point in their lives. So it's probably the axial lumbar pain that you're seeing. There is a common saying that when you hear the hooves, think of the horses, not the zebra. So actually, this is probably when you meet the patient with acute low backache for the first time, with not much of neurological symptoms, well, probably think of axial lumbar pain. What is going axial lumbar pain is a very ill-defined entity where the patient has a very short history of low backache and debility. That means he is not able to do his regular work and activities of daily living. It is not to be confused with PIVD. And how would you know that you don't need to be worried about? You just have to give him absolute bed rest from 1 to 3 days, a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 3 days. You can prescribe anti-inflammatory drugs along with muscle relaxants such as chlorzoxazone, and quickly take him up for physical therapy and active exercise regimen. You have to also explain to the patient that the horizon of recovery, though he may feel very much relieved after 3 days, the horizon of complete recovery, horizon of complete recovery would be around 4 to 8 weeks. Don't be over enthusiastic to get an MRI done, because this is something very interesting, that if you were to do age and risk matched MRI, 76% of people will have, asymptomatic people will have the MRI findings that your patient is having. So I hope now you can understand that how useless the MRI is, until and unless we have done a clinical examination and arrived at a clinical diagnosis beforehand. Because the MRI of your symptomatic patient and some absolutely healthy individual would be absolutely same. And the chances of that happening on a daily basis is 76%. Also, one needs to take into account when dealing with axial lumbar pain, or even for that matter, PIVD, are factors such as depression, occupational mental stress, job satisfaction or job dissatisfaction, anxiety, stresses at home. Because a lot of data suggests that there is evidence that psychological stresses occur before the complaint of pain in a large number of patients. So please take into account the personal history of the patient. In that, you can also casually talk to the patient in a friendly manner, and these things might come up which would require redressal before the patient is going to experience relief in his symptoms. Also note that persistence of some pain is not indicative of treatment failure. You have to counsel your patient. लोग ये expect करते हैं कि अरे भाई हम तो 4 दिन से आ रहे हैं, हम 10 दिन से आ रहे हैं, फिजियो करा रहे हैं, दवा खा रहे हैं, ठीक नहीं हो रहा. This you have to counsel your patient that the horizon of complete treatment is at 8 weeks, मतलब 2 महीने पे complete recovery. They have to understand that presence of some pain and discomfort up to 4 to 8 weeks is not a failure of treatment. This is the natural history and progression of this illness, axial lumbar pain. One also needs to remember this entity, that is the sacroiliac joint mechanical pain or sacroiliac joint syndrome. Classically, the patient will complain of pain just below the PSIS, posterior superior iliac spine, के नीचे, on the side where he's having this discomfort. And the area is roughly 3 into 10 centimeters. This is the classical description of sacroiliac joint mechanical pain syndrome, that the patient will first of all give you complaints of pain in a classical region of 3 into 10 centimeter size, which is just below the PSIS. But the pain can be present in the buttocks. It can also be present in the posterior thigh and posterior aspect of the leg. These are rather unusual presentations, but they are known to occur. When should we consider the sacroiliac joint syndrome? When the patient gives you history of fall on buttocks, especially on one side, when there is a rear end motor vehicle accident, and especially during the accident, the patient's leg was on the brake. Side shear injuries, that means one of the buttocks gets stuck and the other side gets a hit. So there is a side shear injury. And when the patient falls into a pit, the one leg is gone into the pit, but the other leg is extended and is outside the pit. So if you have taken the history, then, and if these kind of histories are forthcoming and the patient complaints match up with probably PIVD, but then even then in that setting, you should think of sacroiliac joint mechanical pain syndrome. Now, these are the two most common entities that we will face on a daily basis in our clinical setting. One is the axial lumbar pain syndrome, other is the sacroiliac joint mechanical pain syndrome. But having said that, there is a huge list of other causes that mimic PIVD. So this huge list, for the purpose of understanding, is divided into two. That the PIVD-like pain, low backache with PIVD-like symptoms, can occur from structures that are extrinsic to spine, that is outside the spine, or intrinsic to the spine. Now, extrinsic to the spine, what all can be there? There is this genitourinary system, there is gastrointestinal system, there is vascular system, there is endocrine system. So the tumors, infections, metabolic disturbances, and congenital anomalies. So tumor, infection, metabolic disturbances, congenital anomaly of genitourinary system. Again, tumor, infection, metabolic disturbances, congenital anomalies of GI system. Again, the same thing for vascular system and endocrine system. So there's a huge list for extrinsic to the spine, causes that can mimic low backache and PIVD. Even intrinsic to the spine, there is a huge list. Trauma, tumor, infection, and immunological inflictions of spinal musculoskeletal system, local hematopoietic system, and local neurological system. So it's a huge number of illnesses affecting large systems that can mimic the low backache PIVD complex. But for perspective, I'm going to give you few of the most common and some of the most relatively uncommon of these ailments. So, for few common examples are ankylosing spondylitis, multiple myeloma, vascular insufficiencies, arthritis of the hip, osteoporosis with stress fractures, extradural tumors, herpes zoster, peripheral neuropathies. And few rare examples are synovial cysts in the popliteal fossa, like Baker cyst, rupture of medial head of gastrocnemius, sacroiliac dysfunction that we have already covered previously, lesions in the sacrum or pelvis, and fracture of ischial tuberosity. So I hope by now you are understanding that backache with radiation of pain, that is paresthesias in the lower limb, is not simply disc prolapse or disc disease. There is a huge number of entities that we have to consider before we label something as PIVD. And I hope by now you're also understanding that even if you get an MRI done and even if you find a disc compressing a nerve root, it doesn't mean that this is because of the disc compression, because 76% of asymptomatic people will also have the similar finding. So your clinical examination history taking into this is very important. And also we have to consider the psychological and emotional aspects. So finally, I'm coming to PIVD. When we say PIVD in the lumbar region, 95% of the cases would occur at L3, L4 and L4, L5 levels. So basically L4 and L5 discs are the ones that would be affected in 95% of the cases. So when the L3, L4 disc gets affected, the L4 nerve root gets compressed. When the L4, L5 disc gets affected, the L5 nerve root gets compressed. And when L5, S1 disc gets affected, then the S1 root gets compressed. So we will divide the, okay, this is also something very important. I'll get back to it later. We will divide into how will we clinically examine. There will be sensory, because the nerves are involved, there will be sensory disturbance, there will be motor disturbance, and there will be reflex changes. So we will quantify whatever we look at, we will quantify into three things. Are there any sensory disturbances in the dermatomal pattern of the nerve root that we expect is afflicted? Are there motor afflictions, that means motor weaknesses, or are there reflex changes? This is again a bit theoretical, but there is a natural history of disc disease. It is divided into three categories. The first is stage of dysfunction, the second is stage of instability, and third is stage of stabilization. So what this actually says is, if we don't do anything, except for a few conditions, I will deal with them later. Even if we don't do anything, over a period of time, the unstable, painful disc segment will actually stiffen or enclose. So we have to be very cautious when we are dealing with this patient. Whatever we do should not aggravate their condition. Hence, we have to be very precise in diagnosing them. So I hope everyone remembers this diagram. This is this dermatomal distribution pattern, and this is very, very important, because this should be imprinted in our minds, both for the entire body actually, because for the purpose of discussion, this discussion is limited to PIVD and low backache, so the lumbar region. So I'm sharing the lumbar dermatome, but we need to remember it for the entire body, so that we can at least identify from which segment is it. If we say thoracic, which thoracic? If we say cervical, which cervical level we are, which cervical nerve root we are experiencing these symptoms. So what will happen if there is L4 nerve root compression? So as you can see, there will be posterior lateral thigh, anterior knee, and medial leg paresthesias. So you can see this posterior lateral thigh, anterior knee, and anteromedial leg. These are the regions that will get afflicted. And quadriceps and hip abductor weakness would be variable, because they are again supplied by L5 also. Reflex changes again are doubtful. It's basically the sensory deficit that will help you find out if that the L4 root is being compressed. What will happen if L5 root gets compressed? You'll see anterolateral leg, dorsum of the foot, and the best region is the dorsum of the first web space. This is the best region to identify L5 root compression. And as far as sensory deficit goes, and motor weakness, you will find that the extensor hallucis, that is the great toe, will show signs of weakness. Well, again, gluteus medius and extensor digitorum longus and brevis. Gluteus medius weakness is hard to elicit, and the best is extensor hallucis longus, extensor digitorum longus and brevis. That is the great toe and the other toes. Reflexes changes are hard to be found. As far as S1 nerve root compression goes, the lateral malleolus, lateral foot, heel, and web of the fourth and fifth toes. So again, you can see the easiest and quickest in the clinical setting is the web space of fourth and fifth toe. So this is actually an absolute jurisdiction of the S1 root. There is no cover there. And the reflex changes would be in the Achilles tendon. So with this, we can identify which root is getting compressed, if at all, because if there is a nerve root compression, then there has to be dermatomal distribution of paresthesias. There has to be muscular weakness in the muscles supplied by that root, and reflex changes should be there. This is also very interesting. Whenever we get an MRI done, you will read the MRI report as thecal sac indentation or nerve root compression. and the terms used would be absent, minimal, moderate, and severe. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But people don't use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. People always use in the MRI reporting absent, minimal, moderate, and severe. And what is most interesting is this: only severe compressions actually correlate with symptoms. So can you see this? That it's only the third, not the 0, 1, 2, 3. It's only the third, the severe compressions of thecal sac or the severe compressions of the nerve root that actually correlate with any real physical symptoms. So MRI has a very limited role when you're dealing with backache. So what are the treatment options when you're dealing? As I have said, that mostly you will be dealing with axial lumbar pain or sacroiliac joint syndrome. First thing is rest. 1 to 3 days of absolute bed rest, and then during that period of rest, anti-inflammatory plus muscle relaxant. Quickly get back to physical therapy. Other treatment options, that once you have found out that this patient actually has PIVD, we have confirmed diagnosis. So what are the treatment options? Of course, rest is there, anti-inflammatory is there, physical. If with these they do not improve, there is the option of epidural steroid injection. So what are we giving in the epidural? And this is a fluoroscopy guided. That means you do it in the OT with the C-arm and with the dye. So you find out where exactly your needle is going. And the epidural steroid injection can be, depends on where the disc is. There can be selective nerve root injection also, or there can be injection into the epidural space itself. So what are we giving? We are giving 1 ml of 0.75% preservative-free bupivacaine, which is an anesthetic, and 1 ml of 6 mg per ml betamethasone, which is a steroid. So we are anesthetizing as well as bringing down the inflammation. Other treatment options include microdiscectomy, and finally discectomy with instrumented fusion in segments that are unstable. But beware of this one thing, which is cauda equina syndrome. If the patient comes to you with saddle anesthesia, that means perineal region anesthesia in the region of in the perianal region, between genitals and perianal region, the saddle region. If the patient comes to you with saddle anesthesia, loss of bowel and bladder control, and loss of power in progressive loss of power in both lower limbs. Hello. And progressive loss of power in both lower limbs. In that setting, you have to immediately rush the patient to the hospital, because this is the most important. This is a medical emergency. If the patient doesn't get operated within 12 hours, there may be permanent loss of power, permanent loss of bowel and bladder control. So cauda equina syndrome is something that is a red flag that has to be identified immediately, and the patient has to be rushed immediately to the hospital. So this is it. This is my presentation, and now the floor is open for questions. Thank you very much.